Hey guys, hope you all are doing great. And with the CA exam dates announced, hope the studies are going on in full swing for the May 21 students. And as for the November 21 students, I'm hoping they're all prepped up to begin their studies in full josh during the study leave. So in today's video, we are essentially going to cover my strategy for direct taxation. Now, I'm only going to cover the 70 marks, which is pure direct tax, because 30 marks international taxation has already been covered in another video. So the resources, the summaries, the section numbers, and all the limits and all, you can refer in that video, and I'll probably link that in the description so that you can quickly run through that. But having said that, for students who've not taken international tax as an elective, please do study the important chapters of international taxation and do not skip them, because there are quite a few questions which are straightforward and asked from there. And it will be very, very scoring doing transfer pricing, non-resident taxation, and those big chapters in international taxation, because there are short questions going to come from there. And apart from that, I think DT is something which people love, a lot of students love, but the main point or the main focus area here is how do you structure the syllabus, because it's an ocean of information, an ocean of provisions. The Income Tax Act entirely so huge, and it's difficult to do everything. But that's the whole, challenge here, and that is what we are supposed to crack in order to clear this paper. So let's get quickly started in detail. Number one will be the source material and the classes. So I did my classes from JK Shah classes, wherein Sagar Vora sir had taught me direct taxation. So basically, for my source material, it was generally the handwritten notes which I used to write in class. That was the main focus material for me. Now, talking about the module, I think you can split this into three parts. Number one will be the main concept given in the module. Now, this is something which you can refer only if you feel that your classes material is like you're not confident about the classes material, or if you feel that it's insufficient and the module has extra information. You can probably do a sampling check of 1-2 chapters and check that. Else it's fine if you don't do the content, but the illustrations and the test knowledge questions are something which is very, very important to do from the module. But if you're doing any, question book of your classes which has all of that covered, that is again fine. But please make sure that every question from your module is something which you are solving. And wherever you're going wrong, you're writing it on a separate piece of paper, that what is the provision where I went wrong, and is there any case law behind it, or what is it. And the third aspect of your module will be the case laws which are given at the end of each chapter. Now, this is also something which you have to do. But if you're referring any book, say if you're referring Compact, which has a summary of each case law, then it's fine if you don't refer the module for case laws, but make sure you do it. There's a very big challenge here, which even I personally faced. I could not remember the name of the case law, that is the party name. And it was quite a challenge for me. So I think personally, I think if you don't have time, it's fine not to waste or not to spend a lot of time remembering that. Instead, what you can do is just understand that what was the challenge, and what was it ultimately held, and what was the judgment. I think the conclusion is all that matters, and the reason behind the conclusion is what matters. So unless you feel some case law is like a landmark judgment and it's very, very important, and it's very frequently asked in the past questions, then you can remember the party name. Else it's fine if you don't. Plus, there is something called a judicial update, which gets uploaded on the institute website, which are the most recent case laws specifically applicable for your attempt, which are not covered in the module. Now, these are super important, and they may, ask a direct question of 4 marks just on the case of that case law. So these 10 to 12 case laws is something where you have to remember the party name also, and you have to understand the judgment part and the contentions of the assessee and the appellate authorities in more detail there. But apart from that, it's fine if you just remember the judgment. Now, even in the module questions, not in the case law list, but in the questions of test your knowledge, there might be certain questions specific to case law, some theory questions. Now, those I had made a list, which I will show you later in this video. I had made a list of all the case laws which are not covered in the compact or in your case law list, so that if such a similar question is asked, I can remember what judgment was passed. Now, this is about the source material. The first read, since it's a huge subject, the first read would take around minimum, I think, 12 to 13 days, including international tax also. So give yourself sufficient time to understand this subject in detail, because it's very interesting. And that is how you will be able to get an overall understanding of the subject, and you can crack the questions very well. So do everything in your first read. Second read should take somewhere around 6 days, and third read should take somewhere around, I think, 4 days. That's sufficient. But in your 1.5 day, again, you have to plan it very well to ensure that you cover everything. Now this becomes a huge challenge, and that's why you'll have to do a little bit of an ABC analysis to see that what are the questions which are sure going to come in my paper. For example, let me just tell you, it can be PGBP. It will be PGBP. In fact, the question one is always a computation question. So PGBP for sure, capital gains for sure. Then there is a question on charitable trust, which is most of the times asked in the exam. So that is something you should not miss. And it's not a very huge chapter, which will take up a lot of time. But there are a few past questions there, and there are a few case laws there, and a little bit of controversies there. So you have to take your stand very strong there. So make sure that you're very, very clear on what stand you want to take in the exam, because that is a question which is very, very frequently asked. Then TDS provisions are also very frequently asked. An assessment procedure, I know it's huge and it's very bulky, and you tend to not remember a lot of stuff, but assessment procedure is something which is asked. And if you are not comfortable with a question 2, question 3, which has some complex computation or some random provision which you're not comfortable with, your question 5 and 6 comes to rescue there, which is generally on assessment procedure. So you cannot skip it. Having said that, you will have to make very, very summarized versions of the assessment procedures, because you won't have a lot of time. And if you just study it from the main content, then it will take a lot of hours, and you won't be able to do the other chapters, and you will tend to skip on the other chapters in the 1.5 day. Now, there are some small chapters also. Say assessment of various entities is a chapter in the module which has many subparts. So make sure you're doing all the subparts there and you're not skipping on anything. So just go through the categories in that chapter from the module. And there are a few chapters which are slightly on the memorization end, or where they are very frequently asked in the MCQs. And if you know the rate or stuff like that, you will be able to answer it very quickly. But in case you skipped it, then you may tend to lose a lot of marks. For example, your business trust, investment fund, and securitization trust. These three are very much related, but the provisions and the TDS rates and the taxability exemption, whose hand unit holder or the fund, is different in all the three chapters. So you tend to get confused. So this is something you have to do on the day of exam in the morning, so that you remember it very well and your retention is very strong there. Now, there were also certain chapters which were from IPCC, say salaries, house, property, and all those chapters. Clubbing set off also. So clubbing set off you have to do. Just make very, very short summaries of that, because they may be asked in the long computation questions also. House property is something which is also not very much of a challenge, and you will be able to cover it very quickly. Also, there are a few amendments there, and that's why the probability of being asked is greater in house property. Not a separate full-fledged question, but it may be included as a part of an adjustment. Salaries is something which is, very huge and very bulky, and it takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of time to remember also all the limits and the gratuity, pension, and all of that stuff. So only if you have time to do it. Else it's fine if you skip it. Still, I would say it's not that big of a risk, because you are doing the rest of the syllabus very well. But if there are any amendments in salaries, then you do that, because say I think some NPS amendment was there, that exemption amount has been increased or something like that. So amendments you have to do. Also the special rates, 115 BAA, BAB, all of that you have to do. Then the tax rates for each assessee, that has to be done very well, and that's why that has to be revised on the exam day in the morning, so that you don't skip there. Say the additional surcharge of 25%, 37%, which is applicable for individuals, and such trick points can be added in your integrated MCQs as well. So make sure you do all of that. Now let's finally refer to the resources which I had used. So this is the basic index which I had made, for each chapter, that where am I going to refer each chapter from. And these chapter names are, I think, from the module, so that I ensure that, nothing is skipped. So this is just as a reference point, wouldn't be of too much help to you, but I'm just sharing. So, there are certain miscellaneous provisions also, say 269 SS, CS, CSU, which are as in MCQ. So make sure you make summaries of those as well. And these are the topics under assessment of other entities. Yeah, again, MAT and AMD is something which is very frequently asked. So I skipped that chapter. That is also something you cannot afford to miss. Moving on to the sections list. So I didn't make a specific sections list for all the chapters because I had an experience in direct tax in my articleship, and I did remember quite a few section numbers. But just for PGBP and capital gains, for the sake of sequence and ensuring that everything is covered, I made an index. So you can refer all the sections of PGBP here and capital gains as well. Then moving on to the list of forms, this is also something which is not very important, but if you want, you can refer. Now moving on to a document which is super important. Now this is something which I had made for the important dates which you have to remember, because there are quite a few sections which get applicable from a particular date, or the depreciation on motor car, there was accelerated depreciation on between two different dates if the motor car is purchased then. So this is something which they can test you on. So I had made a list of all the important dates which I think can be asked in exams. Then gift provisions became applicable from 1/10/2009. Then the TDS and insurance compensation. This is very important. Now here they do test and they do give you a date earlier than this, and you have to remember that it was 1% on gross amount, and if it's a date later than this, it's 5% on net amount. Then this was what I was referring to, depreciation on motor cars. So you can refer this. This is super important in my opinion. Then this is something which I had discussed a few minutes ago. These are the additional case laws from the module which were not covered elsewhere. So very short summary, so that on the last day I just remember the crux of the case law. This is assessment procedure. Now these are just the time limits under assessment procedure and not detailed provisions, but just the time limits, so that you can refer these time limits on the day of exam, because there are quite a few MCQs being asked from there. Time limit for completion of assessment, return filing, reference evaluation officer, all of this I'm not discussing in detail. Just go through the document once and you can make your own summaries then. Then this was the TDS TCS survey and the other surveys. So there were certain time limits during which the survey could take place, which was different for different cases. And this is appeal, fees for appeals. That's it. Finally, moving on to this is something you have to do on a personal level, and I don't think my learnings would help, but I just share this so that you can understand how you have to write. So whenever you're solving any PGBP big question during your first read, if you don't get anything, you write it. And if there's some case law or circular reference or something like that, you would obviously not have covered that in your content. And that's why you have to write it here, so that the next time you do not refer the question again and you can only refer this list. So these are all the small points which I realized are not covered in my content and are covered in questions, and I wrote all of them here, so that only the 2-3 questions that I've marked for the sake of practice, that's what I do later on. So for the rest, I just refer this list. Similar I had made for capital gains as well. Okay, and finally moving on to section 54. So this is something which, the investment linked exemptions of 54, 54 EC, 54F, and all of that. So it's important to do that, but also it takes a lot of time. And that is why I had ensured that I make a table of it, so that I can look at all of it together, because it tends to be confusing if you read it individually. So this is just a summary of all the provisions under the 54 head for exemptions, except 54H, which is not covered here because it was slightly different. And this is the amendment in section 54, which I added later on. Yeah, so that's it from my end on the resources side. I hope this was helpful. And the main thing in DT is to structure your syllabus into small compartments so that you cover everything, and you ensure that you do especially those chapters which you feel are very important and which are very frequently asked. Also, as mentioned, do the small chapters also, and make adequate summaries, make adequate limits, refer the rates of tax very well, refer the amendments very well, and you should be good to go. And solve a lot of questions, because DT is something, if you just see the provision and you feel that you study DT, that's not enough. Unless and until you put it on paper and you write the solution, you won't realize where you're going wrong. And also, CGBP question, the first question, for each adjustment, you have to write reasons why it's allowed or disallowed, because all of that carries marks. And in case you remember the case laws, it's an added cherry on the cake. So make sure you impress the examiner with your DD skills, and all the very best and good luck for your preparation. Thank you.